Good. Good.
And I
All right.
I am recording this, so
Yeah.
I don't care.
watch out, everybody. So
Uh-huh.
when the class is over, I will send it out as an unlisted YouTube link. So you'll have access to it after as
Oh
well.
no.
I know, Mary, I know. People really like it though. They like to visit you over and over again.
Well, I'm glad they can just see the lecture, not my face.
Well,
So
we can see your face, Mary. I'm going to tell you. You are a little rectangle on the side.
oh, great. Just got up
You
from the nap. Hair's all over place.
you look
Thank you.
wonderful. You could turn your camera off, but nobody wants that. We all want to see you. All right. Go do your thing. I'm going to be quiet now.
Oh, all right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I sure appreciate it. It's been a long time since I've seen you physically, mentally, and otherwise. So it's good to see everybody. We are kind of diverging from our usual Egyptology tonight, and this has been a request from Bob and Joyce and a couple of other folks. So what I put this lecture together on was my experience in field school in 1984. So this is back in the dark ages. We don't have cell phones. We don't have the kind of internet that we have here. So the photographs are not of the best quality in the world, but they look pretty good for as long as they've been on the paper, as it were. So what we did is I did my undergraduate work at the University of Denver. And I started out actually as a business major when I met this archaeologist by the name of Jonathan Haas. And he got me so interested into archaeology, along with my dad's influence, that I did change my major. So what we did is the summer of 1984, is basically July and August, we went to the Longhouse Valley in Navajo County, Arizona, to do our excavating work and to learn how to be archaeologists. This photograph is actually a view of the valley itself. This is Longhouse Valley, in which we're going to be doing our work. So, as you can see, it's just a long valley that runs through the canyons. And it was actually quite a nice place, even though you're considering that it's in the out in Navajo country. So again, I had that opportunity to participate in this archaeological field school. Dr. Jonathan Haas had actually been excavating in this area for some time now, and he would take the students out there for our adventures in life and learning how to be archaeologists. The area that we're excavating is in a valley located in the Navajo Nation. It's located just 17 minutes by car from Navajo National Monument, right around the small towns of Tsegi and Black Mesa along US 160 West. And this is basically scrubland surrounded by slick rock mesas used for grazing of sheep and goats. There's some agriculture at this point in time, but most of it is now just used as grazing area. Now, the aim of this excavation was to continue excavating an occupation site located during the previous season in the valley. We actually got to set up our base camp in the Navajo National Monument Park. We had actually quite luxurious accommodations when you consider camping out. We had real tents set up over wooden floor structures, army cots, picnic tables, sun showers, porta potties, and a real gas stove that was run on propane. We didn't have any running water nor refrigeration, but the Park Service rangers graciously allowed us to use a freezer that they had in their maintenance building to allow us to store our perishable food. And each day we would get to make like 2 of these plastic tubs of ice blocks for our field lunches. Now, what always surprised me is when Jonathan gave us the list of things to bring on our trip to the desert, because I wasn't thinking the desert at night gets cold, but he said to make sure to bring blankets and a warm sleeping bag. But yeah, on the monument itself, it would be 85 to plus during the day with lows in the 40s at night. And in the valley, the highs would get to around 110 during the day and lows in the 30 at night. So you would actually get cold at night, snuggle down in your sleeping bag with as many blankets as you could bring, and on occasion, even wearing your t-shirt on your head to keep yourself warm, and then wake up to this nice blazing sun later on in the day. But generally, the weather in the valley is clear and hot, with there's weekly to every couple of days monsoons that would blow in around 4 p.m. So in the months of July and beginning of August, about once, twice a week, you would just see the clouds gathering up over the mesas and blowing down into the canyon, and it would just pour. Now, these are some of the folks that were on the excavation with us. This is Dr. Haas and his wife Winifred. She is also an archaeologist. Jonathan is actually is still an archaeologist, and he has been working at the University of Chicago Field Museum for the past 30 years. So when I was in Chicago at the University of Chicago, I did get to see him again. And these were just a couple of the other folks that I worked with out in the field. Some of the hazards in this area are obviously these temperature extremes, heat exhaustion, dehydration, geological hazards, including slipping down what they called this slick rock. And boy, when it got wet, it was slick. We had botanical hazards of allergies, noxious weeds, poison ivy, plant pollen, cactus spines, stickers, bullheads and thistles, wildlife including snakes, scorpions, fire ants, mountain lions, coyotes, fox, bats, wild horses, burros, domesticated sheep and cattle, and what they told us was bubonic bunnies. Out here at this time in 1984, and still today, they do actually have the bubonic plague. And they always told us to look out for what they called the bubonic bunnies. If you saw a rabbit that was not running away from you and had strange lumps on its face, stay away from it. It had the bubonic plague. Needless to say, it was, for those of us in our early 20s and archaeologists ready to dig in the dirt, it was just absolutely fantastic. You had to
Did
do
you
your
see bubonic bunnies?
I did not play with the bubonic
But
bunnies.
did you see them?
Yes, we saw a couple of bubonic bunnies.
Oh wow.
And yeah, they said if the bunny rabbit doesn't run away, don't go pet it because it had the bubonic plague.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
They still have that in the Southwest. They have squirrels and bunnies that have the bubonic plague.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and then every morning you had to make sure and check your shoes that there weren't scorpions in them, which is why we got a wooden floor underneath our tents. As you can see, one of the tents in the background there. And the army cots, as most of the time the scorpions couldn't get up the legs of the army cots, but when you went to bed, you wanted to make sure you shook out all of your sheets and the sleeping bag and your pillow before you went to bed, and then check your shoes and all of your clothes in the morning. So you didn't put your clothes on with, any friends. That was always fun. Okay. For this class, we had about 6 weeks, and this was an actual graded class. So the first thing we did is we arrived and set up our home base at the camp, toured the area we're going to be working and got to know what we called our local shopping venue. There was a little tiny 2-pump gas station, a little bitty mini mart that had a little tiny cafe in it called the Yumbo Cafe. That was along US 160 in between the Navajo National Monument and Longhouse Valley. Again, remember, it's 1984. This is before our big, come and goes that have coffee and all of that good stuff. But they did make really good Navajo tacos. And they did have actually one washing machine and a dryer that you could do your laundry at. And it was really interesting going to the Yumbo Cafe because being, let's face it, being white middle class female, really didn't experience a lot of, um, racial sensitivity. But the Navajo are very interesting. They had at that point in time, I don't know, I haven't been out to the Navajo Nation for a long time, but in Navajo culture, if that you turn your back on someone, then they just don't exist. So you don't have to interact with them. And yeah, we were those crazy white people out there digging up dead people in the valley. And they thought we of if someone dies in a house, especially a traditional Navajo hogan. It's telling me my internet connection is unstable. So there we go. Hopefully we're not going to lose anything. If a person died in a house, a lot of times they would actually the Navajo would actually just abandon the house. And then they were called ghost hogans because the hogan or the house would be left for the ghost. So they thought we were crazy Anglos. And that's what they called us behind our backs. But they would service you and pay for your things, and they'd turn their back on you, and therefore you didn't exist and they didn't have to see you anymore. So it was really kind of interesting to come face to face with something like that. But they did make really good Navajo tacos. For our normal time is we would get up at the crack of dawn and we would have, cereal for breakfast, milk and cereal that somebody would run up to the ranger station and get the milk, as we also were allowed a little bit of their refrigerator space, and lots of coffee. We'd pack up our lunches, which we would make every morning, generally PB&J sandwiches, fruit, and what we affectionately called lard cookies, because there's those sandwich cookies of vanilla or chocolate that you get in a box of, comes in a package of like 100. And the first thing on the list of ingredients is lard. So that was our food for the day, was as many peanut butter and jelly sandwiches as you wanted, fruit, lard cookies, water jugs, canteens. We'd bring our sunscreen, hats, pile it all in for the trucks, pile all the equipment into the trucks. A lot of the equipment that we used for archaeology and we were learning to use was surveying. There was a surveying transit. You see them being used by like the highway department, where you look through the little viewer, and we'd have strings and stakes and shovels and trowels and pickaxes, screen boxes, clippers, hammers, saws, paint brushes, toothbrushes, plastic and paper bags, buckets, and of course the sight camera. After a long, hot, dirty day, we'd all head back to camp to unpack the trucks, fill out our field notes, and while we were doing all of the unpacking, field notes, and going through the items that we had discovered that day, Jonathan was actually a very good cook. And he had the propane stove in order to cook dinner. Now, we had really sketchy breakfast and lunch, but oh, what he could cook for dinner on that stove of his, it was wonderful. And of course, when you're that hungry, anything tastes good. We would schedule, we actually ran on, you'd work 10 days and have 4 days off. And then during that time off, the reason we took 4 days in a row off is we would head off of the res to Page, Arizona, which was the largest town near us. And they had we'd hit the laundromat, we'd hit the grocery store, and we'd hit the liquor store.
Well, speaking of medicinal uses, Bob and Joyce want to know, was the ride down into the canyon scary?
No, it was actually, it's a fairly stable ride because we were taking the highway. So the highway would take us from Navajo National Monument down in, and then we would drive off onto a dirt road into the valley. And the valley was pretty flat. The fun, quote unquote, part was after the monsoon would come in the afternoon, more than once the truck would get stuck up into the clay. It's not just clay, and it's not just dirt, but it's clay. And the truck would get stuck up to its axles in clay. So we would all have to get out and push the trucks out covered head to toe from mud. And then we would hope it keep raining so then we could at least take a shower in the back of the truck. So we didn't really have any issues. Occasionally would come across the gentleman's land that we were excavating on basically said a couple of things. Number one, if we found any bodies, get him the heck off of his land. He didn't want them there. Don't mess with his sheep, and fill in the hole when we're done. He did not want any of the bodies there. The Navajo, we're going to be talking about what we were excavating, were called the Anasazi, and I'll go into that a little bit more here. But the Navajo came in after the Anasazi, and they do not consider the Anasazi as their ancestors. The Ute and a couple of others of the other tribes consider the Anasazi their ancestors. So all the Navajo wanted was the dead bodies off his land and don't mess with his sheep. And that's what he was concerned about. Once in a while, we would come across, somebody else wandering across their land or his land, and most Navajos at that point, and that's just because of where they were living, had rifles. So we just wanted to make sure you didn't mess with anybody's sheep and mess with any of their places. And otherwise, we were once again just the crazy Anglos. And then one day we did actually get to take a whole day of vacation and go to Lake Powell and Page and go swimming in the lake and hang out. And that's the one day in those 6 weeks that I actually got sunburned. I was so good about wearing my hat. I was wearing long sleeves, long pants, jeans, long sleeve shirts, hat, scarf around the back of my neck so I didn't get sunburned. All the other girls are out in their cute little short shorts and their little short sleeveless shirts getting their tans, and I'm covered up. So I didn't get a sunburn, but fortunately Jonathan was a redhead too. So he was wearing long sleeve and long pants too. Now, this is just a cute view of some of the folks that I was on the excavation with at Lake Powell. So we can see Lori and those girls, and there's Chris and Modsig and, oh Lord, I'm having a brain hiccup, Joel. So we did get to actually have fun. We did really have a good time with this. Now, the culture that we were excavating used to be called the Anasazi. It's an ancestral Puebloan culture that's a prehistoric Native American civilization that existed from approximately 100 to 1600 AD. The site that we were excavating dated to approximately 1100 AD. Now, this generally centered on the area where the boundaries of what they call the Four Corners, which is Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah, intersect. Now, the descendants of these ancestral Pueblo Indians comprise the modern Pueblo tribes of the Hopi, the Zuni, the Acoma, and the Laguna. At one point in time, they thought it was part of the Ute. The Ute do still claim them as ancestors, but mainly the Hopi and the Zuni. Now, these ancestral peoples were farmers, and there was nomadic neighbors, and they were also mutually hostile. And this is actually where the term Anasazi comes from. Though Anasazi is a Navajo word meaning ancestors of the enemy, which once served again as the customary scientific name for this group. And in 1984, they were considered to be referred to as the Anasazi, and that is what I've always referred to them. So it is an older, name that the Hopi and Zuni and ancestors of the what was called the Anasazis, these ancestral Pueblo cultures, find the name Anasazi insulting because it is a Navajo name and has nothing to do with them. So this ancestral Pueblo prehistory is typically divided into 6 developmental periods. The approximate periods and their dates, it starts with the late basket maker phase in late basket maker 2 from 100 to 500. Basket maker 3 is 500 to 750. Puebloan period is 750 to 950. Pueblo 2 is 950 to 1150, and that was the time frame of this place that we were excavating. And then the Pueblo 3 culture was 1150 to 1300, and the Pueblo 4 culture was 1300 to 1600. When these first cultural timelines of the American Southwest were created in the early 20th century, they included the basket maker 1 stage, but they created this hypothetical period in anticipation of finding the earliest stages of transition from hunting to gathering into a fully agricultural society. But by the late 20th century, archaeologists actually concluded that basket maker 2 peoples were actually that beginning group of people that showed the transition from hunting gathering to the fully agricultural societies. So instead of renaming basket maker 2 and 3 to reflect this, basket maker 1 is generally eliminated from these regional timelines. Now, these basket maker 2 and 3 periods are named for the fine basketry that can be found, that was often found in these habitation sites. And in these areas in North America, basket maker 2 combined hunting and gathering with gathering of wild plant foods and the beginnings of corn cultivation. These peoples of basket maker 2 typically lived in caves or shallow pit houses constructed in the open. They would also create pits in the ground that were used for food storage. The storage pits were also often lined with stone and capped in order to aid food preservation, to prevent vermin infestation, and to prevent injuries of people falling into these pits. In this area that we were excavating, that Jonathan had started excavating, there was areas from basket maker 3 all the way through Pueblo 2. So we did see some sites and actually walk about around some sites that are from the earlier cultures. So it was really quite interesting to walk around and see all the different, ages that you could see. But these were when the people were actually living out in the plains, later or in these valleys in homes. And then later on, we did take side trips to go see the cliff dwellings and giant Pueblo dwellings that come of the later Pueblo 2, 3, and 4 time periods. The basket maker 3 period, also called the modified basket maker period, is marked by the increasing importance of agriculture, the introduction of bean crops, and the domestication of turkeys to support these agricultural pursuits and increasing population. People built irrigation structures such as reservoir and check dams, low stone walls used to slow the flow of rivulets and streams in the area. This increased soil moisture and decreased erosion. And while hunting and gatherings continued, it was a supplementary role. There was an increasingly sedentary way of life coinciding with wide uses of pottery. The basket maker 2 people resided in relatively deep sub-semi-terranean houses that were located in caves or in mesa tops. During this Pueblo period is when most of the buildings shifted above ground, and we're starting to see a large number of communities being built with more than 100 adjoining rooms. Stone masonry was being used, and kivas, which were underground circular chambers used primarily for ceremonial purposes, became an important community features. Cotton was introduced as an agricultural product. Pottery assumed greater varieties of shapes, finishes, and decorations, and basketry became less common. Now we will see I've got a quick couple of views of some of the pottery that we found. What they did is they started painting a basketry design onto the pottery. So things that they used to use as baskets for storage, they were now using pottery, because obviously it would survive the weather better. and be more airtight. So they continued by painting a basketry design on it. Now, throughout this period of the area of ancestral Pueblo occupation continued to expand, and where new communities were being built in these canyons in addition to the traditional mesa top locations. Now, Pueblo I communities were quite large. We're showing the Pueblo II period into what we're going to be excavating is characterized by a greater diversity of settlements. We're seeing small hamlets and villages being built in addition to these large communities, or great houses as they were called. Kivas also became more diverse. Some are built in towers, some were built in huge size, and we continued with the smaller circular kivas that were put into the ground. With this Pueblo II that we're going to be, that we were excavating here, it is a very small settlement. It's a family farming community in which they were farming, they were grazing animals, and they were hunting and gathering to add to their diets. Now, the Pueblo III period is the time of the great cliff dwellings that we're going to look at later. These villages are built in sheltered recesses and faces of cliffs, but were otherwise differed little from masonry or adobe houses and villages built previously. We had large freestanding apartment-like structures built along canyons or mason walls. In all of the settings, the dwellings often consisted of 2 or 3 or 4 stories. They would be in a step-backed fashion, so the roofs of a lower room was actually kind of your patio or the terrace for the room above. And some of them had 20 to as many as 1,000 rooms. Populations in these became so concentrated in these areas that many of the smaller villages and hamlets were abandoned. So what they were doing is they were concentrating the population in the one area. So instead of living in the middle of your farm, as we will see when we were looking at, it's now large tract farming with everyone living in these larger communities. Craftsmanship in pottery and weaving achieves its finest quality during this Pueblo III period. Most of these communities were abandoned by about 1300. That time actually marks the beginning of the 4th Pueblo period. It is really believed that a convergence of cultural and environmental factors caused this abandonment of the communities. So it wasn't due to warfare or any sort of internal competition. There was a great drought in 1276 to 1299 that probably caused the massive crop failure. And this problem of the unpredictable rain and sparse rainfall actually continued in this area until 1450. So what we're actually looking at is it was basically a severe shift in the weather. So yeah, they almost experienced problems of global warming of their own. And at the same time, perhaps in relation to this great drought's impact, obviously the availability of wild foods became a point of conflict between these ancestral Pueblos and the ancestral Navajo and Apaches. So during this Pueblo IV period, the Pueblo people moved to the south and the east, building new communities where gravity-based irrigation works could be built, including the White Mountains of Arizona, and as well as the Rio Grande Valley. And though some of these new villages were even larger, they tended to be cruder in layout, and construction is much also cruder than their earlier counterparts. The production of fine pottery, however, did continue to flourish and develop, as did weaving. So from in this Pueblo IV period, when during the Great Drought, when competition finally came in due to the drought, this is basically where they got their name Anasazi from the ancestral Navajo peoples that was handed down to the current Navajo. They were their enemies at that point in time. That there was just not enough rain to be creating enough food. There wasn't enough wildlife, and a lot of is basically why these great Pueblo cultures came to an end in this area. Okay. Now, our site was designated LHV 73B, so it was obviously Longhouse Valley was the LHV, And the site area that we were working at was 73B. Since this was field school, a lot of the really difficult and time-consuming work of laying out the site itself and doing the grid work. And so it was 73B because we were in grid 73 and section B of grid 73. So that work had already been done as Jonathan had been working this site for some time. And our grid site was a very small occupation site, ended up containing about 2 or 3 family structures. Each of these family sites contained 2 to 3 rooms. There was a communal trash pit and a small round kiva. Again, a kiva is a round structure that was built for religious ceremonies. All we have remaining is the round barrel shape of it. We don't have the roof on it, so we don't know if it had a curved roof. It may or may not have had a roof on it at all. Some kivas were roofed with perishable materials, so they were roofed with what little wood there was, because again, being this is a desert area, there's not a lot of wood that was being used for building purposes, but the local clay, the adobe, was being used as the building structures. Now, in these larger communities, these great houses, which we're going to see at Chaco Canyon, the kivas were absolutely built in proportion to the number of rooms in a pueblo. So there was one small kiva built for roughly every 29 to 30 rooms. So these were communal areas for sharing. There were communal areas for small religious ceremonies. And then these larger complexes would host an oversized great kiva, which could be up to 63 feet in diameter. Now, since we were out there to learn how to do things properly, we weren't, we were all new at this, most of us. We had a couple of the students that came back with him before that were helping us as teachers. But proper scientific excavation of an archaeological site involves a lot of digging, a lot of very minute work, a lot of what a lot of people call boring work, and not a lot of discovering, as we all learned over time. This is the time before India, but yeah, this is not Indiana Jones where you knock something, but the part of Indiana Jones where you saw them just moving bucket after bucket after bucket after bucket after bucket of dirt. Now, what we did find at this site was actually quite interesting and really a whole lot of fun. We did actually find a burial near the trash pit, found many, 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 many sherds of pottery. A sherd is just actually a piece of broken pottery. They have red and black pottery ware. There was cream pottery ware. We found little pieces. We found larger pieces. Later on, when we got back to school the following semester, then we would take all these pieces in the lab and clean them and start putting them together to see what we had. We had charred pieces of firewood from hearths as well as other bits and pieces. We learned how to take pollen samples, identify different time levels in the stratification of the occupation site, and unfortunately, what happens when one of the landowner's sheep falls into your partially excavated kiva while you're gone for the night? Yeah, that was not a happy sheep, and that was not a happy landowner. He was very upset. He couldn't find one of his sheep, and we found the sheep in the kiva. We were very fortunate that the sheep did not hurt itself, but it caused an awful lot of damage to our excavations. So, are we all ready to go digging in the dirt, having a little fun? Okay, these are some pictures of the site of LHV 373B. I forgot the H. I do apologize for that. This was some of the area that we were going to be excavating. Now, as you can see, these little humps here is what we call the Navajo slick rock. You can see it in the background. It's very open, windswept rock, so there's not a whole lot of dirt on it. And when this gets wet, it is literally just slippery. So you would just kind of go sliding all over the place. And then you can see here where the excavation area is going to start, because this is all over this valley, this slick rock, as they call it. And you can see some of the stones here are quite large in size. And here on the side, I don't know if you can see here on your right-hand side is almost, it looks like somebody set some of these stones in line. So the first thing you have to do when you excavate a site is basically just look at it. What looks out of place? What looks like it might have been placed by humans? And as we start digging into this area, I don't have pictures going from day to day because these are just my personal photographs. Remember, we didn't have digital cameras at this point in time. We didn't have cell phones at this time. We were out here in the middle of the desert, and our job was to dig, not take pictures. So we had the official photographs at the university, which I did not have access to. These are my personal photos. So if anybody has any questions about anything in the photo, please let me know. But this kind of shows you how you start excavating a site. As you can see, kind of along the line in the middle, what we're looking at is, you see there's a little string and a stake. And by using these strings and stakes, you map out and land out the area that you are going to excavate. As you can see, the excavation has started. And you can see kind of how we've started to dig down around those rocks that were sticking up out of the dirt. And again, in the background, you can see the walls of the canyon. There's our trusty bucket for filling up with dirt. And this is a small screening pan, the round thing you see here in the background. We actually had large screening boxes. One of the things that you do when you are excavating something is when you dig up things and you put the dirt in the bucket, you then go to a screening station, which is this big wooden box with a screen in the bottom of it, much like a window screen. Dump the dirt into the screen box and shake back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth to get all the loose dirt out. And then you can paw through the sand and the dirt of what's left and start seeing, are you seeing any rocks that look like they've been worked with by human hands? This is how you find your pottery sherds. Every single little bitty piece and scoop of dirt has to be screened at an archaeological site. Every shovel full has to be screened because you never know what you're going to miss. You might miss tiny beads. You might miss pieces of pottery. You might miss pieces of obsidian. So it was a long, hot day in up to sometimes 110-degree heat. Every once in a while we would have a decent breeze, but I was in my 20s. It was fun. Getting filthy, digging in the dirt, and discovering all of these exciting things that you would find. This is a picture of all of us. We each would have a square that we were excavating. And this right here is some of that screening boxes that I told you about. You see the wooden box and they're holding a handle of it. We would have a little wooden two-legged frame that the bottom legs would move. So when you pushed the box forward and backwards, it was kind of like a lever that would allow you to hold on to the box if you didn't have somebody to hold the other end. Either there was two of you, one of you each holding the end and shaking it back and forth to get all the dirt out. Now, of course, you have to do that away from your excavation site, because any dirt and pollen that might be coming out on this could contaminate your site. So you could be getting dirt and pollen from the previous level being blown back into the level that you're currently working in. So you wouldn't realize just how meticulous this all has to be. And yes, while we were doing screening and digging with shovels, also most of your work in archaeology is done with a very small triangular hand trowel and paintbrushes. You don't want to break something with your trowel. I think that was one of the hardest things to learn, was how to cut a level down and not break anything so you can see the stratification of each site. This is, again, more pictures. There's Jonathan. And here we are, as you can see, the strings and the stakes laying out the grid areas that we're excavating. And again, just the piles, the slick rock that just naturally pops up in between these areas of the dirt. This gives you an up-close view of one of the grids that we were excavating. And this is what I was talking about, the stratigraphy. In order to see levels and what's going on in the levels of dirt, what we would actually do was only excavate half of the square to begin with. Because then you can see, if you learn how to read the dirt. So you can see things like, was there a specific time, had there been, actually one of the things you can find is, had there been any fires? As you would see a line, a band of darker dirt. You could see changes in the dirt as it was filled in. You can see changes as it goes down finally to the slick rock. And that's what you do, is you excavate it all the way down to that base rock. Now, being that they did not generally put in quote unquote stone floors, one of the truly tricky things in an area like this is learning how to read the dirt as to what would have been a floor line. Because most of these houses started out on the slick rock or the bedrock as the floor of the house. As occupation goes on, because some of these sites were occupied for many, many years, sometimes instead of digging out the floor, you just put another layer of dirt on the floor. So we had to learn how to read the lines, but these are some of the stones that created the walls at the portion of this room. And as you can see, when you are excavating, you don't knock off these pieces. You're not looking for a smooth wall, because this might be something important from the time above it. So what we're actually doing is digging from the most recent levels down to the most ancient levels. And trust me, when you accidentally break through a floor line that you didn't recognize, Jonathan would let you know. So it's all done with paintbrushes, small screens, buckets, paper, and pencil. There were no portable computers at this time. No digital cameras. Everything had to be on film and developed. And there was your typical triangular trowel. One of the funniest lessons we had is when you are taking pollen samples, what you want to do is just get a very, very teeny tiny, itty bitty layer of dirt and pollen samples from on top of whatever floor level you're at. Now, of course, we have these little bags. Everything you found, if it was pottery, sherds, etc., went into paper bags that you had to label with LHV 73B, then what is the grid number of this grid and what level you are at. So when we got back to the office, or got back to the campsite, we would know what was going on in that site. I saw there was a couple of chats there, so let me see if I can take a quick peek here. Oh, yeah, you have to have patience. That's true, Bob and Joyce. You must have patience. And you actually kind of have to like being able to do fiddly stuff. So, yeah, what does that say about me? I have patience for digging a floor, but I have no patience with other things. So, now, in order to get pollen samples, here we were all thinking that you take your little plastic baggie and scrape a little bit of dirt into it. Well, no, actually, to get a proper pollen sample, you see that little triangular trowel there that you've been digging through the dirt with and occasionally smashing scorpions with, because yes, the scorpions would run around and we were rude. We smashed them. And that was generally, unfortunately, after they stung us. and digging in this dirt and all these things. And Jonathan told us the best way to take a pollen sample. And he took the handled trowel, he wiped the trowel off on his pant leg. He proceeded to lick the back of the trowel and stick it in the dirt. Just lightly tap it on top of the dirt that we wanted the sample from. Then he put the blade of the trowel in the plastic bag, wiped off that dirt into the plastic bag, sealed it up, and labeled it. So yeah, I was like, can't, because you don't want to waste your water in this area because there is no running water. There's no creek nearby. The only water we had was drinking water. So he didn't want us wasting water washing off the trowels to get a pollen sample. So yes, I spent the summer licking the back of a garden trowel. I did. I fully admit it. None of us thought to ask, well, what happens if we have our DNA sample? Because at that point in time, they obviously weren't doing DNA samples on these. So yeah, we got to lick trowels. We got to dig in the dirt. We got to play in the sand. It was marvelous. So one of the joys of being an archaeologist is playing in the dirt. So if you like to play in the dirt, go volunteer at an archaeological excavation sometime. I still want to go out and do that again. This is a photograph of the various different kinds of pottery that we were finding at this excavation. And these sherds were all found on the same level. Don't worry, they were all properly marked and bagged later on. You can see they have the typical, what they call the red ware, which just means it's the red color. And then we have the black and white, obviously, because it's a white pottery with a black design on it. And again, you can see this black design that was done. And this black and red ware. So it was black pottery with red designs. But again, like I said, sometimes they would make the design look like a basket. And this is where you see the basket designs on them. We were finding pottery and sherds of all different sizes, and every piece had to be notated where it was found, where it was excavated, etc. And my goodness, I'm just nattering on here and we're going to run out of time. So these are some more. This is my excavation pit once I finally hit the bottom of it. That's my friend Dorothy. Dorothy actually still lives in the area, and she actually works as a she works still in this area with Navajo and Native American cultures. This is the burial that we found in the trash pit. We might think it is odd to find it near a trash pit, but we have to remember the trash pit was used and reused and reused and reused. So the people who were living there at the time may not have known that there was actually a burial in the trash pit. It was not indicating that this person was to be discarded like trash. But as you can see from there's the skull and there's the legs. They were buried in fetal position. And as we agreed with the owner of the Navajo land, we did end up fully excavating this skeleton, and we did pack it very carefully up. It was wrapped. Each of the bones were wrapped, and the ones that came loose, actually what we also did was they just kind of took that whole section of dirt with the bones still locked in them and did not release it from the earth. And this was then returned to the lab. And everything we found was actually being held by the University of Denver in trust for the Hopi and the Zuni and the Ute Indians who claimed these people as ancestors. So we were being very respectful of the human remains. But as you can see, the word tools of the trade, the buckets, the shovels, the trowel, and the whisk broom. This is how we photographed the site, is Joel being nice and tall along with Chris, and Lori being very light was how we got aerial photos, no drones flying over it. This is Monsig, and he was actually excavating the kiva. You can see this rounded site, and again, we were only excavating half of it at a time. And this is one half of the kiva excavated. And this was lunch on the site, and you can see the clouds are rolling in and getting, or this was maybe, oh, yep, lunchtime. The clouds are going to start rolling in for one of our monsoons. Joel was very tired and hot, and obviously doesn't have a real smiley face on there. But our peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, our fruit, and our cookies. And we did get to have occasional nap time, which I'm still doing these days, huh? And there's Lori and Dorothy. That's Dr. Haas. Now, when we were since we were camping out at Navajo National Monument, well, of course, we took time, some of those 4 days were spent exploring the area. And there are cliff dwellings at Navajo National Monument of Batatakan, Keatshill, and Inscription House. Inscription House is closed to the public due to the damage that had been done to it. Again, these ancestral peoples farmed the stream beds in these canyon bottoms and then flourished in these high desert environments, buildings, and dwelling sites in the formations of the sandstone, and then building them up off of the ground. So they hunted the wild game, grew corn, bean, and squash, similar to the climate today, relying on canyon streams for water. They succeeded here for several hundred years, but again, by the 1300s, the villagers moved on, probably because of that drought. This is the cliff dwelling area of Batatakan in the Navajo National Monument. And again, this is this double layer that we had talked about of housing. You can see that this all was dwelling sites. You can see all of the stones that they put together to build their houses here. This is inside the cliff area of Batatakan, so you can see how far up these houses went. And this was put together with stones and masonry, or the clay, the adobe. These are not baked bricks. These are stones that were piled up. There's Dorothy and Chris. And again, you can see the interior of these caverns and these cliffs would very, very well protect you from most of the elements, keep you dry, keep the sun out except during the day, keep you protected from the animals on the valley floors. And here is a remaining of walls of a building, one of the dwellings that used to stand here. And again, see, they even made windows in their walls. And you can see just how cozy these cliff dwellings would have been. You also had to be very careful on these cliff dwellings because, again, you're going to slide. These people were very good at climbing rocks. Another view of the outside from the opening into the back of the cliff dwelling, of the cave. Just some more of the buildings. Jonathan lecturing. And this is a large view of what we were just inside. And as you can see, this giant cave cliff area was a whole town of people all living together. And they would come here and live. And then during the day, they would go out into the valleys or go do their hunting, attending their crops. There used to be a stream that would flow right along here, which did when it rained. So they had running water, they had protection, and the cliff also helped hold in what heat from the day, so it didn't get to those extreme colds at night. And in the winter, when it does snow in this area, because they are farther up from the valley floor where we were, it also helps keep them protected from some of those winds. Now, it's called Batatakan Cliff Dwelling because it opens into this canyon, which is also named Batatakan. And as you go through this canyon, you can see here would be like areas where there would be the cliff dwellings, if those are the cliffs. Down here, the canyon floor. There was room for architecture, agriculture, good hunting areas. And as you hike through Batatakan Canyon, you can see there's running water, these streams running through, which has brought it down to the bare slick rock. And this is another view of that, of the next site that we're looking at here, which is not the cliff dwelling, but this is called Kitsio. This is another cliff dwelling in Batatacan Canyon called Kitsio. It's much larger than the Batatacan cliff dwelling and very, very high up. The one at Batatacan, the Batatacan cliff dwelling was not as high up, and you could actually physically walk up to that cliff dwelling. This one, you see that tiny little railroad track thing right there? That is a ladder. That is how you get up to the Puebloan cultural site of Kitsio. Now, this ladder is actually, it was put in by the Parks Department. It is basically sticks out about 6 inches from the side of the cliff. And it goes up, I think it was 100+ feet. Now, I don't know about you folks, but I'm scared to death of heights and I'm scared to death of ladders. And Jonathan and I had a very long discussion as to whether I was going to climb up that ladder or not. And Jonathan pulled the professorial card and said, if you don't climb up that ladder, you will not pass the class. He was mean that way. So yeah, I climbed up that ladder and got up there. Now we'll see there's some remains of wooden ladders that were built by the peoples who lived there. And you want to talk rickety ladders, you would know, and it was not attached to the side of the cliff. This ladder is firmly attached to the side of the cliff, so you don't have to worry about it falling over. Scared me to death. I told him once I got up there, he might have to get a helicopter to get me off of it, because climbing down, to me, that's scarier than climbing up, because you never know when you're going to miss a rung climbing down and go kaboom, just like the coyote falling off of the cliff in the Roadrunner cartoons. But yeah, it is huge. It is high. It is amazing. So yes, I climbed up that great big ladder, which just looks like a teeny tiny little ladder. I climbed up there. And this is actually from one side of the cliff dwelling of Kitsio to the other. So I'm taking the picture. I'm not hanging up, but you can see they built these walls to make sure that nobody fell over the edge of the canyon. Can you imagine having toddlers living in some place like this? How worried would you be that your kid was going to fall off? And seeing these would have been poles that were used for ladders and for other structures, because they did have those those pole pines, as we saw in the view. Oops, I'm going the wrong direction here. Hang on. So you can see they did actually have trees to be able to use for making ladders and etc. But this is the the cliff dwelling site of Kitsio. And as you can see, there's paintings on the wall too. They have petroglyphs. Beautiful figures painted on the walls. This is what a typical house looked like. And as you can see, they used timber to help hold up the roof of the house. And this again is stone put together. These are not baked clay bricks like you see normally in the Puebloan peoples today, but they still made beautiful windows to let in the air. And you can see these huge logs right here, which are also on the level below this house. So again, you have a house built on top of the other house, and the top of that house, this one here, being used as the foundation and the patio for this house. There's still, this is original woodwork from the 1100 CE. Beautifully preserved, because these caves do still stay dry. So the wood is preserved. You can see the jumble and how they made the roofs. And this is one of the ladders that used to be used for this cliff dwelling. You would put the ladder down so everybody could go up and down during the day. And then at night, you pull the ladder up so nothing or no one could come in and sneak up into the cliff dwellings in the middle of the night. This is one of the restored areas. They have done some restoration so you could see what it looked like. But again, nice little houses. And of course, that black on the roof above it, on the roof of the cave, is obviously because of the fires. When you have your hearth fires and you live in a cave, it's going to turn the top of your cave black from the fire. Again, just some more pictures, but also just, again, how did you live up there and not fall off? But there's one of the hearths that they used for cooking. There's another hearth that was built. And then from there, we also went to Chaco Canyon, which is the center of the Chacoan culture, which is another one of the large ancestral Puebloan cultures. Now, this Chaco Canyon was being used in the mid 800s and lasted almost 300 years. And in Roman times, they would say all roads led to Rome. During this time of the Chaco and Pueblo dwellers, all roads led to Chaco Canyon. These building sites are huge. There were thousands of people. And honestly, these roads were a straight line built from other centers with Chaco Canyon at the center spoke of these spokes of a wheel of these roads running all the way over. And in Chaco Canyon, we had these great houses that we had talked about. There was the great houses of Pueblo Bonito, Una Vida, Pinasco Blanco. Then they were followed by the buildings of Hongo Pavi, Chetroquetl, Pueblo Alto, and others. These structures were often oriented to the sun, lunar, and cardinal directions, and there was line of sight between these great houses. This is where these roads would run, between these great houses, and then there was roads running from this area all the way out to other areas. There were sophisticated astronomical markings, communication features, water control devices, and formal earthen mounds surrounding these areas. And buildings were placed within a landscape surrounded by several sacred mountains, mesas, and shrines that still have deep meaning for the Puebloan cultures today. Chaco became the ceremonial, administration, and economic center of this San Juan Basin area. The sphere of influence was extensive. Again, dozens of these great houses in the Chaco Canyon were connected by these roads. There was more than 150 great houses throughout the region. Excuse me, I had to take a drink here. These great houses were not traditional farming villages, were not occupied by large populations. These also may have been, some of these areas may have been public architecture used periodically during great gatherings of many tribes or many groups of these Puebloan peoples, used for ceremony, commerce, and trading when temporary populations came to the canyons for these events. So you still had the small housings like what we were excavating, but then maybe once, twice a year, they would have kind of maybe akin to what we have as a, what's the word I'm looking for? A fair, a county fair, some sort of meeting like that. Everybody would get together in this communal area, such as one of these great houses of the Chaco Canyon, and you would have your yearly religious festivals. You would have your annual religious festivals. You would have a giant annual market. So everything that you have been creating over the winter, when you've been in the snowed in, you've been weaving and you've been creating pottery and trade goods and turquoise. And then again in the fall, you would have it to start trading and exchanging your the goods that you have grown. So there might have been twice a year meetings, and then there were probably some people who lived and maintained the area. But it being that Chaco was the hub of the turquoise trading network, and this could be where you could acquire things from all over the place. They did find copper bells. They found shells and other commodities from distant lands. So this may have been an area of meeting and redistribution Again, so Chaco Canyon may have been the center place binding all of these people together. We never have fully understand Chaco Canyon and never may. Around the 1100s and 1200s, change came to Chaco as construction slowed. Chaco's role as a regional center shifted. Now, it continued influence in at Aztec, Mesa Verde, and the Chishka Mountains, and other centers to the north, south, and west. In time, people shifted away from these Chacoan ways, migrating to these new areas, reorganizing in their new worlds. And again, we believe it was because of that great drought. Now, among the descendants of these people, there are many of the modern Southwestern Indians. Many of the modern Southwestern Indians do look upon Chaco as an important stop along their clan's sacred migration paths, and it is a spiritual place to be honored and respected. Really some amazing stuff going on here. And so we're going to look at some of the photos that we took. Now, we actually took one of our 4-day trips and spent time camping out in Chaco Canyon. Obviously, we were not doing any excavation because this is a national park, so you are not allowed to excavate it without permission. We did not have permission to be excavating there, but we did actually, we were allowed to pitch our tents and our camp near some of the ruins. Normally they would not allow camping at these ruins, but because we were an archaeological field school, and at this point in time we brought our tents, we didn't bring our wooden floors, so you really had to be careful about checking out your clothing for bugs and scorpions and that sort of thing. But as you can see, we were camped right next to one of the smaller ruins. Another good view of our little campground. Again, you have your typical slick rock, and you can see where the water comes down, and we were just glad that it wasn't raining. Our little tents, instead of our big fancy tents, we didn't have our big fancy cook stove either, so we were literally camping out this time. And these are some of the petroglyphs that were found at the site of Una Vida, and you can see the different animals, probably indicating the local wildlife. You can see there's a little something there with ears and 4 legs and a tail, and also these spiral designs. You will see these kind of spiral designs in the petroglyphs all over this area and all over the Southwest. But these petroglyphs are probably dating to about 1000 to 1100 CE, but just all the different designs that you can see. This is the site of Chetro-Ketl. Remember, they talked about that they would build these large apartment-like buildings along the base of some of these mesas. And this is one of the walls. This is a wall of the Great House, where all of these people would come and stay during the time, or living here outside of the large area of Chaco, of Pueblo Alto and Pueblo Bonito. Those are the 2 large pueblos that we're going to see, and they are huge. So we did get to do quite a bit of hiking at this time. This is the site of Quincletzo. Again, you can see it's another small occupation site of where people would stay when they were in this canyon area. This was probably part of the areas that people were living and then would travel over to the great pueblos of Pueblo Bonito and Pueblo Alto. And you can see it's a trailhead. It's actually a very beautiful area if you are interested in going into any of these national parks. Navajo National Monument, Chaco Canyon National Historic Park, I believe they are still closed right now due to the COVID, but they are actually wonderful places to go hiking. Okay, whoop. This is the backside of Quincletzo, and you can see from, actually yeah. Or this is just another view of it. As you can see, there's 2 levels, and the roof structures have fallen through and gone. These are preserved, but they haven't been restored. So you can see again the small stone construction, how they were all put together, beautifully made. And there's more of a close-up. Again, you can kind of see the levels in between where one building was put on top of the other. There would have been the roof structure or a floor structure in there if this was a second floor on something, just right out there on the scrub ground. And that's a lot of sage and tumbleweed and etc. And in the background, then you can see the large mesa in the background from Kinkletso. Now, I'm honestly taking an educated guess that this was Kinkletso because I couldn't find my notebook from 1984, and I had put the pictures in an album that just said Chaco Canyon. So, yeah, I think it's Kinkletso. I could be wrong. I wasn't as anal retentive about labeling things as I am now. I wasn't a fully trained archaeologist yet. This is the interior of one of those buildings in Kinkletso. So you could see that there might have been a roof beam sticking out. And you can see the different kinds of constructions. And when it was done, there was a little shelf there. So again, this may have been the roof with the roof beam sticking out. And it may go farther down into the dirt, but these have not been excavated. So that's why it's showing only half of the room. And then there's that full room above it. And you can see all the different size rock that was used in the construction and put together, just piling rocks on top of each other. This is a view from Pueblo Alto, or actually across to some of these areas of Pueblo Alto, because we had climbed up the slick rock at this point. And there's some roads down here. They're doing road construction. And this is a view from Pueblo Alto across to one of the larger housing areas. Now, Pueblo Bonito is huge, and it is actually up against the base of Pueblo Alto. So you climb up Pueblo Alto and you overlook, there's a huge drop. Pueblo Alto, the mesa itself, is hundreds of feet tall. So you climb the slick rock going up. And I was literally laying on my stomach over the edge of Pueblo Alto, over the edge of the mesa, because once again, I am scared to death of heights. And I snapped a couple of pictures, and using today's wonderful technology, I was able to stitch them together to show you the full layout of Pueblo Bonito. Now, we were talking about the large kivas. Now, this is one of the larger kivas. This one is about 60 feet across. You can see the housing areas along the side, and then these great open areas that were probably for trading. And then there's smaller kivas for smaller ceremonies. This is why they're thinking that Chaco Canyon was probably maybe a public area that was maybe only used a couple of times a year, where everybody would come together, trade their goods, trade information, share religious ceremonies, and put all things together here. So that's pretty much our trip. We did have some interesting things, which I kind of glossed over at the moment because I wanted to make sure that I got to show you all of it. But some of the really fun things that we found on our excavation, besides this burial, what we would do is we would take a day on our 4 days off, and we would go on walkabout. We'd just drive to another spot and look at all of the remains and resources and ruins that were in the area. And sometimes we would just walk about in the valley, just to explore the valley, to see what else was there outside of our quote unquote excavation site. And it was really quite exciting because as we were on walkabout one day, I literally stumbled over a burial. There was 2 femurs sticking straight up out of the ground. And we stopped and looked and figured the feet had probably already been blown away, as it was obviously buried at one time. And things had shifted over the years, and the winds and the rains and everything. So all that was left was the ends of the shin bones sticking up out of the ground in this valley. Since we were already on good terms with the Navajo Nation, we did actually get permission to excavate this burial, because of course their first thought was, get it out, get this dead body off of my land, is what the owner thought. So we did get permission from the Navajo Council to excavate that burial, and it was actually a high status burial. I don't have any pictures of it. I don't know if I ran out of film or what, and I was not able to access the official photographs from the University of Denver. But it was a female, and she was actually buried in an unusual form. She was laid out. She was not in the fetal form as this person had been. She had to have been of high status because she had on silver and turquoise bracelets, a necklace, and earrings that were still intact with the skeleton. And buried right around in a semicircle above the top of her head was 5 small pots that fit in the palm of your hand. And they were all sealed, and they had not been broken yet. So we were very excited. Jonathan had never found anything like that out there before. So I got a special treat of the day because I found it. There was always a special goodie that you would get for job well done, or et cetera. So instead of a gold star, my treat for that day was a real shower. They had shower facilities at the maintenance shed of the rangers at Navajo National Monument. And we had to draw lots. 2 people a day were allowed an actual real shower. And so I got the prize of one of those real showers without having to draw a straw for it. So that was a really neat thing. And it was limited water. So if you've ever seen any Navy movies or a naval background, such as I had with Dad and my brother-in-law, I got in what the submarine vernacular is called a Hollywood shower, meaning I got to leave the water running while I took the shower. So instead of turning on the water, getting wet, soaping up, turning on the water to rinse off, because there was a small water heater in that maintenance shed, and there was literally just enough water for 2 people to take decent showers and wash their hair and have hot water. I got a Hollywood shower. I didn't have to turn the water off in between soaping up and rinsing off. Okay, you may not find that exciting, but trust me, it was really exciting at that time. Most of the time, that's the only time you got a shower, unless you took a sun shower, which was a bag of water that was left out in the sun to warm up, and then you hang it up from a branch of a tree, and you open the spout and use the little shower head. So yeah, basically standing out there in the slick rock and hoping nobody rode by on their horse and saw you showering out in the middle of nowhere. So we just pretty much opted to be dirty. Oh, I see a chat comment. Yes. Oh, well, it was awesome. You know, when you're in your 20s, that is kind of fun stuff. As Bob and Joyce said, sounds totally awesome. And it really was. We had like tent awnings that were in squares around the sun showers. But yeah, some of the boys thought it was really funny to like collapse the shower screen while you were taking a shower. So there you were, butt naked on the slick rock. Fortunately, we didn't have cell phones with cameras on them at that time. That would have been bad. As I said, we did run into some scorpion problems when I was out screening sand. I'm not the only one. Quite a few of us got hit by scorpions, so we got stung. My hands started swelling up like Mickey Mouse, and I asked Jonathan, I said, well, are these deadly scorpions? He says, no, not unless you're allergic to them. I said, well, how long does it take? What do you mean as if you're allergic to it? He says, well, your hand's going to swell up like yours is doing right now. I said, and? He says, well, if you have trouble breathing, then it's going to take, you've got a half an hour before, you suffocate and die. And I said, okay, so where's the nearest hospital? He says, oh, that's in Kayenta, about 45 minutes away. So you'll be fine. Fortunately, I think at that point in time, I don't think anybody thought about having an EpiPen. But yep, so then I got stung on the foot. So I had to spend a day or two in camp. So I spent that day learning how to label pottery sherds. When you're doing an excavation, after you've got the remains back that you are looking at, every night we would go through our paper bags and make sure everything was labeled properly. And then part of our lab work when we got back to school the next semester was going to be labeling them. Every little piece in a museum has an identification number on it. And that's what I did. I spent 2 days with a very fine ink pen writing teeny things. And that's actually when I discovered I enjoyed doing that, which came in very handy when I was working at the Denver Museum of Natural History, now the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. One of my jobs as the assistant to the curator of the anthropology department was to assess new pieces into the collection, and I'd have to write all the teeny tiny little numbers on them. Yes, it was slave labor. But we were having fun. We had a good time. We paid to go do that. I would pay to go do it again. I would like to do it again. We did have a run-in with some fire ants when we were at Chaco Canyon, walking along and accidentally step on a nest of fire ants. You've never seen anybody get out a pair of pants so quick in your life. Chris accidentally walked across a fire ant nest, and I've never seen anybody drop trout so quickly in his life, because they were just crawling right up his legs, the poor guy. We were all brushing fire ants off of him and trying to get him away from the fire ants, because when fire ants swarm, it is not a fun thing. It was a really great summer. I learned a lot. I continued to work with Jonathan till I graduated in 1986. We continued to work with these items in the lab, and then they were stored at the University of Denver. I don't know if they're still there or if they were returned to the nations that claimed them as ancestors as part of the Repatriation Act, but we were only holding them in trust for those groups of peoples. We obviously did not keep them. We stored them for them, but they were never accessed into the University of Denver collections. And then one of the things we did once we ended the site, because you think, okay, so what do you do when you're not digging, and how do you protect what you have excavated, is basically the last couple of days on any excavation site that is going to be closed for a season and does not have an enclosure over it is what you call backfilling. Everything was documented, as you see being done in this photograph, and then we backfilled everything. So every, grain of dirt basically that had been removed was put in a pile and then was moved back in and leveled over and smoothed over, so the farmer did not have any problems with his sheep falling into holes anymore. And we crazy Anglos who were out digging up dead people in the 110, 120 degree heat, the Navajos thought we were nuts, finally left that beautiful area. It was absolutely marvelous. I learned a lot. And I found out when I got home that I had brought home an unexpected souvenir with me. Now, when we flew home, we were filthy. I felt so sorry for the people who had to sit anywhere near me and next to me on the plane, because we had not had a chance to go back to Page to do laundry. We did not have, except for those lucky few that did actually get to take a shower before we left. So I was overnight in the Denver airport waiting to fly into Omaha. So I did get a chance to go into the bathroom and do some washing up. But when I got home, I unzipped my basically army bag. It was a big army bag, and just dumped all of my laundry into this huge iron laundry sink that we had in the house in the basement. Now, my parents were out of town when I got home, so I unzip my bag and I dump it all in there, and I start going through and throwing laundry in. There was this scorpion sitting in my pile of dirty laundry, and I don't know what killed it. Either it died of suffocation from being in the bag, or it was the smell of my socks. But that poor scorpion was just petrified. Oh dear.
That seems pretty apt for the experience, I think, Mary.
Yeah, yeah. I felt so sorry for anybody who had to sit next to me. And then Bob did mention that, yes, Larry, he says that they thought that Larry Niven also told everybody about Chaco Canyon, or Joyce mentioned that. So was there a lecture on Chaco Canyon at some point in time that I missed?
Not through me, but
Yeah, maybe it was through Joyce. When was that lecture with Larry?
He didn't do a lecture. Larry Niven wrote he writes science fiction.
Oh, okay.
He wrote a couple of novels dealing with the Southwest in about that time. I found them I enjoyed them, but
Huh.
yeah.
I might have to put him on my reading list, but
I think the name of the book was Burning Tower.
yeah, I think there is actually a Burning Tower archaeological site.
Yeah, it's entertainment. That's all.
Oh, well, hey, there's nothing wrong with entertainment. One of my favorite books, even though it's a pain in the patoot to read, is oh gosh, Ancient Evenings, a book about ancient Egypt. That is a huge, the paperback is like 3 inches thick.
Yeah. This is a much smaller book.
Yeah. Yeah.
He said he's going to write a 3rd book to go with the series, but he has not yet. But
all right.
It has magic and stuff in it. So.
Oh, well, yeah. Questions, comments, suggestions we're going to start looking suggestions for April. Anybody